So I'm Yves, by now you know, so Kelly will do the timekeeping and the Q&A, so she'll wave if I talk too long, but I'll try to make this sweet and brief, and then during the Q&A, if there's things you want to know, you just ask. So if we experience that deliberative democracy works, which I think most of you by now will agree, then, well, it's actually very strange. If you do this once and you're like, this works, then the question becomes almost inevitable. Why don't you use it a second time, third time, or like the Irish, like continuously? And then if you start doing this continuously, you will have a number of questions that arise that might be less important in the one-off. Okay. It's time consuming. It's like how many times do you do a wedding, Taylor? Right? If you could keep comparing, if I can. Okay, so and birthdays is maybe a good. How often do you do an assembly? And you know, it's about resources. And Ireland, yes, but maybe in smaller places, this might, you know, this is energetic. I see somebody nodding here. It's a question about resource. If you do several of them, who can set the topics? Very often in a one-off, there's a commissioning government, or there's somebody who says like, well, we'll do one on this is a pressing. But if this becomes a regular feature, who actually decides what these things are about? For those of you who did political science or law, the trias politica, legal, executive, and the judicial branch, and suddenly you want to plunk something new into the existing institutions. Where do you drop your citizens in this existing mix? And then if you have continuous citizen assemblies, they keep producing these recommendations and, you know, even more cherries to pick. So, you know, there's more and more question about follow-up, under what conditions, who must do that, and who controls that this actually happens. Because if more and more booklets are produced, so these are some of the central questions. Now, if only we could try this somewhere, and Annie, you've been there, so you could do this presentation. Yeah, for a long time, this was a theoretical question, until introducing the German-speaking community of Belgium. Ta-da! Yes, high energy. Ta-da! Also called Belgian. It is a very small piece of history, a very small chunk. Again, Annie, you've been there. It's something that happened after World War I. There's some German-speaking people that we got from the Treaty of Versailles. Well, there was a demand and etc. So Belgium has actually a very small community of a few 10,000 German speakers. It's an official language of the country, yes? And when we decided to regionalize along language between the Flemish speakers and the Francophones in the 1970s, these people were like, if you're dividing competencies by language, we're here. So this small place received a parliament because the Flemish received their parliament, the Francophones received their parliament. So these few 10,000 people received their own federal competences. And so they have actually a beautiful, I love this parliament. The view is a park, right? So they have their own parliament. And yes, they have a government. This is the full government of the German-speaking community of Belgium. So it's a very small place, yes? And then if you're looking for the place where we could try institutionalization, you need revolutionary politicians who really want to push the buck on citizen engagement, right? These really alternative, progressive people are like, we're going to give loads of power to citizens. Here are your two revolutionaries. So they're both center-right politicians. Alexander Miesen was president of the parliament, liberal, economic liberal, not in the American sense of this, so right of center. And he's from ProDG, he's the head of the executive. So you have like the power of Ostbelgium together there. These two decided at some point that it would be a good idea to use deliberative processes continuously in their community. And they asked the G1000, which is a Belgian organization, we want to do this thing in a continuous way. What is existing as, you know, things that we can apply? And we told them like, nothing. You would be the first in the world to do this. And so what we proposed to them is, but we can get some people together to design this for you. So it's actually the first design meeting we actually organized. Afterwards, we did this for the city of Paris and for other places. But this was our first where we got a group of experts in the world together. So for example, for those of you, Marcin Gerwin from Poland, he's been mentioned several times, is here. Brett Hennig from the Sortition Foundation. This is David Farrell, Jane Souter's colleague. This is Carsten Berg, who did the European Citizens Initiative. Some of you might know. He got it into the Lisbon Treaty. So here's Carsten Berg, Claudia Schwalitz from the OECD, Graham Smith from NOCA. You see a very younger version of myself. Somebody flew in from Australia on their own cost. He said, this is great. And this is the founder of the New Democracy Foundation. And we said, we can't pay you a ticket. They don't have money. It's like, this is so great. I want to come myself. And so he just booked a flight and came over. And then the writer, David van Rijbroek. And we also had a constitutional scholar, because we were going to change a law and write a law, how to do this. So we put together a group of people, and we did something like we did now, but we did an expert session. And over 2 days, we tried to think, how could you design something that institutionalized citizen assemblies? The core of the whole model is the citizen assembly. That works. We knew we start with what works. So actually, here they're called citizen panels. So in this whole model, the central thing is the citizen panel. Yes? You just organize several citizen panels. And then, everything you've heard over the last 2 days applies to that. But what about those questions I've put forward? Well, who will set the agenda? And this is, for me, one of the revolutionary parts of this Ost-Belgian model, is actually it's given to citizens. In the proposal, and this was accepted by the Ost-Belgian government, we said, set up a citizen council, a fixed assembly. That's actually a continuous element of your infrastructure from now on. Yes? With 24 members, and how do you make it continuous? 1/3 of the members rotate every 6 months, which means it's always there. Yes? In German, it's called the Bürgerrat. Yes? So the council, and so the citizen council, and these people have 2 main tasks. Once a year, they set the agenda. So in the law, this is stated in September. Why? In September, and this is about policy cycles, the government makes its announcement in Parliament of the opening of the parliamentary year, what their ideas are for the next year. Yes? And the parliamentary year is open, so all the parties do their opening statement. So we said, have the Bürgerrat meet just after that, and so they know what the government is planning, they know what the parties are, and so that's the ideal moment to decide on that. COVID kind of messed that agenda up for the first iterations completely, but that's the general idea. The second element of what they do, yes, so here are your citizen panels. They can decide how many there are a year, up to 3. So they can say, this year we'll do 1, or this year we'll do 2, or even 3. Spoiler alert, they've already decided that 1 a year is more than enough. So 1 birthday a year is, 1 wedding a year is enough. They have also some leeway to decide how many people will be in a panel. So they can make a 25-person panel, small, or they can say, this one is a big subject, this needs to be a bigger group, 50 people. Yes, minimum 3 meetings over 3 months. So there are some limits to, they can't say, this one is done in an afternoon. So the law does stipulate, but they have a sort of envelope of the number of assemblies, the topic of the assemblies. Now, who are these 24? These are people who sat on citizen assemblies beforehand. They're alumni from citizen assemblies. Because if you do these continuously, like in Mostar and Misko, you now have these people who've been in an assembly. And so you do a random draw from these people. Why? Well, you need to have some experience what a citizen assembly is if you want to set a topic for a citizen assembly. Yes? If you've never been in one, you might come up with something like, oh, sounds great, and then the practitioner will go like, well, actually that doesn't really work very well. So they're actually, all their meetings are assisted by the secretariat. So there's also a person working there full time who assists to all the meetings, who is really, here in the side of the slide, but the really important person in that who makes the whole thing, the administrative support of that. But so this citizen council doesn't decide this out of the fly. It's not those 24 meet in September and go like, what do you feel like, Imre? I feel like. No, they can take input from society. So people can propose subjects. You need 100 signatures, which is not a lot. But why do we take 100? Is you want to avoid overload, that some interested citizen does 20 proposals and has almost no support, but overloads your work. So you need a little threshold. But actually, after 100, we stop counting, we said. That's to avoid what is called the beauty contest problem, where an interest group will put the link and say, just go vote here, and then you have to take the one that wins. Yes? Some of you know about this Boaty McBoatface, where people could choose the name by vote of a new boat. I think was it in the UK? It was in the UK, and the government had said, we'll take the name that gets the most votes. And some funny guy said, Boaty McBoatface, and everybody went to vote for that. And so the boat is called Boaty McBoatface. So it's called but interest groups can capture online, it happens all the time, by the way. In more serious online participation, there is really a danger of institutional capture by interest groups. And so to avoid that a small political party or whatever with 150 votes could decide the topics, 100 is enough. And then it's on the desk of the Citizen Council. And they decide autonomously. The government can propose and political parties can propose. So once a year, they have this stack of proposals on the table and they decide. So what do they also do? All these recommendations coming out of citizen panels have to be treated by the parliament. So the law that came out of this proposal says there is at least 3 moments in which there is feedback. The first one is the presentation of the report. This is where the citizens talk and say what they've done. There is some initial feedback from the politicians, but it's more the moment where the citizens present their work. Then there is 2 parliamentary debates, one in commission. About 3 months later, if it's about healthcare, it's in the Health Commission. If it's about education, so it's really in the commission. There is a reply with what will be done with the recommendations. But of course, this is a plan, yes? So they say, oh, this is interesting, we will work on this, or we will, So they reply to what they think they will do with the recommendations. And then a year later, there is a plenary session in which then is said where they stand on the follow-up that they promised. And the Citizen Council does a monthly meeting with the people from the parliament to see how this follow-up is going. They only look at procedure, not at content. Yes? Because they're different from the people who are here, who are just a citizen panel drawn by lot, who do the work, 3 weekends, 4 weekends, go home. So they don't know if this was about education. These people don't know everything that was given here, all the information. So they will see whether, if there's 24 recommendations, that all 24, there is a reply, there is a lengthy reply, and etc. But they don't follow up exactly. These people are open to follow these meetings, and they can reply content-wise, like, but that is not what we said, but the Citizen Council only looks at procedure. Is there actually a follow-up? And so this is how the system works. And so this was voted unanimously in 2019. So the whole parliament, 6 parties, yes, small region, but still 6 parties, that's what you get with proportional representation, voted for this. Unanimous vote. It got some international attention because it was a first in the world. Yes, so even The Economist wrote a page about this. I've lectured political theory for a while, so this title was like, I can die a happy man now. I've achieved. I'm there. If The Economist write this of something you were even just a part of, everybody in that expert group can. But so it got a lot of international attention because it's really something unique, because it's a bill. It's not a kind of promise or whatever. They have to do this. If they don't do this, they break the law. Yes? Now, what makes it unique, I've said most of this, agenda is completely set by citizens. So a unanimous vote by politicians on a system where they say there will be citizen assemblies, and actually we give complete control to 24 citizens in a citizen council to set that agenda. Yes? Follow-up is done by a specific body composed of citizens. There is a dedicated group of citizens that checks whether the follow-up is done. Yes? So continuously, every month, there is a meeting, a liaison meeting between the representative, very often it's the head clerk, and the Bürgerrat to say like, we're working on this, but this takes a bit of time. Citizens learn that sometimes policy takes time and can't be solved in a few weeks or months. Or so it's seen as a dialogue, not as a pit bull control. Yes. Interesting and still pretty unique is there is a bill institutionalizing this. We've talked also about Marcin's document. Marcin Gerwin has a document, article, etc. It's not a law, but that it's a good guiding document, because politicians, you can say like, this is the guiding document. And I would encourage you, if at some point you see an opening for institutionalization, having a law makes that it's really put down in stone what counts as a good deliberation, how a sortition needs to be done. There is no room for improvisation, or politics can't play around with this. It has to be done. So assemblies must be organized within a certain format. Yes. Now, until now, 3 assemblies have been completed. So the system is running since 2019. Of course, you know that they voted this, and then end of 2019, COVID happened. So they had a bit of challenges. So the first one was, interestingly, crowdsourced from the citizens, was working conditions of people working in care professions. So that was the first crowdsourced, mainly about retirement homes. Yes? So then one about inclusive education, because they have German-speaking schools, and in big communities, big language communities, you have special schools for kids with special needs and all of that. In a very small community, how do you do inclusive education? Yes? How do you make that work? And a third assembly was on the topic of affordable housing. Yes? And now there's one running, I think it's almost completed, on, maybe Oni, they told you whether they completed it or not. It is completed about ICT and about information skills, but also about digital divide. And so a fourth one on digital skills is running at the moment. It's the meetings of the assembly have ended, but the process is still running. Only one of them has now reached its full cycle. Because if we talk about assemblies in this kind of system, the full cycle is really from 2 years. It's planning. The first point of the cycle is we will have one on healthcare work. Then it is preparing the assembly. Then it's the assembly meetings. Then it's the meeting with the parliament. Then it's 3 more months where the commission replies. Then it's another year. And in the law, it even stipulates that the Bürgerrat can say after that year, it's still unclear. We want to schedule another meeting. So they can schedule meetings if they want until they feel like, okay, this cycle is closed. So there's actually, in that one, out of the 14 recommendations, 9 will receive follow-up, 66%. I leave it up to you whether that's a lot or not. Response rates have been high, with 9% of the citizens receiving an invitation willing to participate. Actually, in the first sortition that I helped set up, 12% replied why they didn't want, well, actually, that's very, I don't know the experience of other people. There were as many people replying with a letter apologizing why they couldn't, and because there was a birthday of their, and I thought it was like very, so actually the total reply was 25%. 1 out of 4 replied, so 12% in the first one, yes, and 12% to explain why they couldn't say yes. So they are up to 90 different recommendations by now, because the 3 assemblies have produced 90 recommendations. This is, I would say, kind of a washing machine of recommendations, has now 90 recommendations in them for this little parliament. So half of them come from the one on housing, so that one produced really a big stack of recommendations, but still. Over 4,000 citizens of the region, there's 80,000 people living in the region, have now received an invitation, yes, to participate. So this is over 1 in 20 adult inhabitants has received this invitation by now. So it's really something that is very present by now in the region. Citizen Council has had 39 different citizens as member, and in total 84 citizens have been a member of a citizen assembly, of one of those topical assemblies. Okay, a question I often get is, what was so magical that you could get a unanimous vote on a bill institutionalizing this and giving this power to citizens? First of all, proximity. Yes, it is a small place. Yes, it is 80,000 people. From north to south, it's 110 kilometers, so it's a bit stretched out. So it's also very rural in places, but it's a very small town. So the kind of citizen is still a citizen they know, yes? They had a first trial assembly in 2017, and when I talked to all the politicians, so if you're doing your first assembly, it's actually maybe the one that will convince your politician to do this afterwards. Most of the politicians I talked to ahead of the vote, I did the lobby work with some other people, mentioned, no, but we did this one, and actually we were surprised how good the citizens, so they trusted, they weren't like this crazy thing. They had seen citizens do that, seen that citizens were actually, what you're all now knowing, are actually very reasonable and trying to make good, work for their community. So they had a first trial assembly. All members of parliament are just working people. They are members of parliament in that parliament as a side job. So it's really, they have their meetings in the evening. And I've assisted to some of the meetings. It's really like, he's still late, but he's coming from work, right? So they're members of parliament. For them, the citizen is their colleague they just saw during the day because they're a teacher, right? So it's really the closeness of, it's a small region open to innovate. I'm not going to go too much into it, but also on other fields, they've been very open. Like we have the room, the space, for example, greenways. At some point, they invested massively and they were like, everything that you can turn into greenways. So they're very open to kind of say like, okay, we'll experiment. We're the small region, we can do this. Which actually the minister-president told us at some point. If somebody has to experiment, let it be us. We'll do this. And then, of course, some luck connecting need for ideas with an idea. In the sense that they wanted to do this, the minister-president is there, and he met during a reception in Brussels, the writer of this book, Against Elections. This is a book for deliberative democracy. But so the minister-president met at a reception in Brussels this writer, who is also the head of the executive board of FIDE, David van Rijbroek. He's a known Belgian writer who writes a lot on democratic innovation. And they just met each other. They actually had a chat over a cocktail where he said, like, does this exist already? Oh, no, you could, and this is actually, you need some luck sometimes to have the right person at the right place. But all the rest was in place. So once that clicked, they were ready to go. What are the lessons learned? Follow-up guaranteed in a bill works. It needs to be done. It is tiresome sometimes for the administration, but they can't say no because the bill mandates it to do. And you really see how, I don't know, Annie, you talked to a few of the politicians, but they really have to get into these commissions and do that work. It is part of the bill now. So it's not an option or you can forget because the citizens won't come back. And maybe because they're Germanophones, the bill really matters. You know, you have to do it because it's important. And this is really for the people in the administration here. Resources are not only about money. What I do hear coming out of this is, and this is why they've decided to do only one a year, like the bill gives them the option to do 3, is capacity of the administration and also of the fixed council. So for the administration in a small parliament, maybe in Ireland, that would be more people, but in a small parliament, the administration takes this on top of all the work they have already. And so it is really harsh sometimes to do evenings, go in weekends, assist to meetings, but you already have the day job from 9 to 5 and, you know, on Friday, well, there's a citizen assembly, so you also have to do your weekend on the... There is still a need to involve the wider public more. Even in Belgium, they had sometimes more attention from The Economist and the Financial Times than from the local media. And it's a very hard thing to get media interested in this, because for them it's a hard format. They love the polarized politics, but like citizens nicely sitting quietly, working at tables, it is boring in some ways. For what do you tell about that? The citizens were sitting nicely and working collaboratively. So there's still a bit of a hard time. Yeah, young people remain the hardest to get into the room. So after 3 iterations, it's the hardest group to get. They've actually lowered the bar to 16 years, but it's very hard to get these people. The 16 to 25s is really the hardest group to get. Seniors and men are the easiest. And then they did, after 3 years, their first evaluation. It is really also, after 3 years, citizen and politicians agree we need to think more about how to fit this in policy cycles. So I think we're at a point in citizen assemblies where they're more established, is how you click this into, for example, the second one on education. The current president of the parliament told me, like, that was a good one because we were just thinking about reworking our educational plan. So it fitted nicely. Whereas the other one was a bit harder because we just had a plan on. So there is now the idea that the 4 they had were sourced from the community, that it's maybe time, and the citizens were really open to this, maybe politicians should suggest, like, what are we needing input in this moment? So actually, you get to a point where the citizens are like, yeah, we have the power to set the agenda, but maybe could you propose something where we could help you? So it really is a dialogue. The whole system in the German-speaking community, they call it the Bürgerdialog. So it's a dialogue between politics and the citizen body. So, but really the point now is, how can we fit this better to have more effect? So also the politicians had a frustration when the evaluation happened, that they said, some of these recommendations we would love to, but we can't because we're in another policy cycle, or we just decided something, and so it's frustrating for us. You know, you've done this work and we have to say no. So citizens who participate also have a better understanding of the complexity of policymaking. You've known this by now. They actually stand next to you, and if you have to make a difficult decision. And here they are. And what is interesting about institutionalizing, and this is something you also saw in Eva's video very well, actually there's a benefit for the society because these people become energized and very often go participating in their community in other ways. Yes? And so if you do this institutionally, in a place like Belgium, every year you add a layer of citizens who feel resourced and go into your community feeling energized. And these are parents, grandparents, family members. So in Belgium, at some point, a citizen assembly, if you received a letter, Imre, and you're in the pub and you go like, oh, what's this, I received this. Somebody next to you will go like, no, I was in one 3 years ago, or my uncle was in one. It's not some abstract thing. It becomes something where it really lifts also the democratic fitness of your community. So slowly, small proposal I had, which I was a bit frustrated they haven't taken up. They take these photos, and I said to the communication person, you should have a wall in the parliament and each time hang them up. So at some point, yeah, somebody could go like, you see, I'm there. Like, have a wall of citizens, of everybody who participates. So there's a kind of, remainder for them to also show that they were part of their community making public decisions. And I had a minute left, so I think I'm fine. All right, thank you.